I managed to collect 170 amazing historical photos that you might have missed. Write in the comments which photo you liked the most. On November 21st, 1963, John F. Kennedy greeted crowds from an open car on Houston's Interstate 45. Less than 24 hours later, he was assassinated during another motorcade in Dallas. These vaults once held the secret nuclear weapons built by South Africa's apartheid regime. By 1991, all 6 completed bombs had been dismantled, making South Africa the only nation to build its own nuclear arsenal and then destroy it voluntarily. 9 months before Rosa Parks, 15-year-old Claudette Colvin refused to surrender her bus seat and was dragged away in handcuffs. Civil rights leaders rejected her as the movement's public face, but her testimony later helped a federal court end bus segregation in Montgomery. Born to formerly enslaved parents, Ada Bricktop Smith rose from poverty to become the queen of Paris nightlife. She mentored Josephine Baker and Duke Ellington, taught the future King Edward VIII the Charleston, yet her name is nearly forgotten today. Smedley Butler, pictured with Marine Corps mascot Sergeant Major Jiggs in the 1920s, was one of only 2 Marines to receive 2 Medals of Honor. He later condemned the interventions he had led, saying American troops were being used to protect corporate profits. Sergei Krikalev was orbiting Earth when the Soviet Union collapsed, leaving his return mission trapped in political chaos. His flight was extended to 311 days, nearly twice the planned length, before he finally returned to a country that no longer existed. The shattered remains of the French battleship Dunkirk are being scrapped at Toulon in 1958. Once one of France's most advanced warships, she was scuttled by her own crew in 1942 to prevent German capture. In 1894, Mark Twain held a vacuum lamp glowing without wires inside Nikola Tesla's New York laboratory. Tesla, barely visible in the shadows on the left, powered it with high-frequency electricity, and the remarkable photograph appeared in the Century magazine the following year. Diver Stefan Panis found this sealed bottle of Guinness inside the wreck of the Mindoro, which sank in the English Channel in 1864. The beer had remained underwater for 162 years, turning an ordinary bottle into an exceptionally rare piece of brewing history. In September 1972, a dog returned home carrying the decomposed forearm of 16-year-old Jeanette De Palma. Police found her remains near a quarry cliff, reportedly surrounded by strange objects that fueled rumors of an occult killing, but her death remains unsolved. Nationalist troops operate a German 88mm anti-aircraft gun during the Spanish Civil War between 1936 and 1939. Built to destroy aircraft, this powerful weapon also proved deadly against tanks and fortified positions. In 1943, German agents secretly installed an automatic weather station in Labrador, Canada, and disguised it as Canadian equipment. It transmitted for only weeks, then remained forgotten until a historian found it nearly 4 decades later. In 1957, mobster Johnny Stompanato stormed Sean Connery's film set with a gun, but the former weightlifter disarmed him. 1 year later, Lana Turner's 14-year-old daughter fatally stabbed Stompanato while he was allegedly attacking her mother. Fitness pioneer Abby Stockton poses during her United States tour in 1947. Known as the Queen of Muscle Beach, she lifted heavy weights when doctors still warned women that strength training was dangerous. This giant Paracas granary pot stands 2.8 meters tall and was discovered in Monte Fertile, Peru in 1966. Made between 800 and 100 BCE, it is one of the largest pre-Hispanic storage vessels ever found in the region. The Liberator Lassie Come Home served with the United States 8th Air Force from Horsham, St. Faith, in England. On January 14, 1945, the bomber crashed just short of its own airfield. Princess Anne, born in 1950, shares a laugh at the badminton horse trials in 1982. A former European champion, she became the first British royal to compete in the Olympic Games when she rode at Montreal in 1976. Japanese soldiers hold a Chinese prisoner at bayonet point south of Yuepu, Shanghai, in August 1937. The red stamp marks the photograph as rejected by Japanese military censors, who tried to keep such images from public view. Supayalot was Burma's last queen, ruling beside King Thibaw Min until the British seized the kingdom in 1885. She was accused of ordering the massacre of at least 80 royal relatives to destroy every rival to the throne. French photographer Jean-Philippe Charbonnier captured this farming family in Castile, Spain, around 1953. Their patched clothes reveal the harsh, rural poverty hidden behind the Franco regime's carefully controlled image of the country. Claudine Auger relaxes with Sean Connery during the filming of Thunderball in the Bahamas in 1965. Auger played Domino while Connery returned as James Bond in one of the decade's biggest box office hits. This glass negative from the 1890s preserves a striking portrait of a young African-American woman in an elaborate flowered hat and lace blouse. The fragile glass plate captured remarkable detail, from every embroidered flower to her calm, direct gaze. In May 1994, a little-known city official named Vladimir Putin escorted Prince Charles through St. Petersburg. Years before either reached the top, the future Russian president was guiding the future British king. On June 9, 1979, 6-year-old Damien Godson was photographed at Luna Park, Sydney, with a sinister stranger who insisted on posing beside him. Hours later, Damien became one of 7 people killed in the ghost train fire, and the mysterious man was never identified. In 1862, Union troops looting Winchester Medical College found the skinned and mutilated body of Watson Brown, son of abolitionist John Brown. Brown had been killed during the Harper's Ferry raid, and the horrifying discovery enraged the soldiers, who burned the college to the ground. In June 1945, Queen Mary entered New York Harbor carrying more than 14,000 American troops home from Europe. The former luxury liner was so crowded that soldiers packed nearly every open deck for their first view of home. This photograph was taken minutes before the Omagh bombing in 1998, and the red car on the right contained the explosives. The man and child survived, but the photographer was among the 29 people killed. Born in Korea in 1885 to Chinese immigrant parents, conjoined twins Lu Sen-ti and Lu Sen-kai later toured Asia, Europe, and North America. The elastic band of skin joining them let them stand side by side or face each other, and they even played ball and ping pong. During the First World War, a British Indian Army cavalryman gave half of his rations to starving Christian women in Iraq. The photograph captures a rare act of mercy during a brutal campaign marked by hunger, disease, and extreme heat. Hitler Youth members dine at the German embassy in Japan on August 16, 1938. Their visit helped Nazi Germany strengthen ties with Imperial Japan, just months before Europe moved closer to war. 2 couples enjoy a night out at a Pittsburgh nightclub in the 1950s, when many American venues still enforced racial segregation. Their relaxed smiles capture a striking moment of interracial friendship during a deeply divided era. Oscar Wilde sits beside his lover, Lord Alfred Douglas, in 1893. Their relationship sparked a scandal that ended with Wilde being sentenced to 2 years in prison for gross indecency. In 1897, 20 Buffalo soldiers traveled 1,900 miles from Montana to St. Louis to test whether bicycles could replace Army horses. Each bike carried a rifle, ammunition, food, camping supplies, and repair tools as the men crossed mud, sand, rocks, and mountain terrain. This rare photo shows Benito Mussolini moments after German commandos freed him from a mountain prison on September 12, 1943. He escaped in a dangerously overloaded plane that barely cleared the rocks. On April 29, 1945, soldiers of the United States 157th Infantry entered Dachau and found a train packed with thousands of decomposing prisoners. Enraged troops and liberated inmates then killed a disputed number of captured SS guards. This mugshot shows 15-year-old Nicolae Ceausescu after his arrest in 1933 for communist activity and fighting in the streets. The teenage prisoner later became Romania's dictator and was executed in 1989. United States cavalry soldiers posed beneath the grizzly giant in Yosemite around 1900, revealing the enormous scale of the ancient sequoia. The tree is about 3,000 years old, stands more than 200 feet tall, and is still alive today. A Czech woman confronts Soviet soldiers on a tank during the invasion of Prague in August 1968. Warsaw-packed forces crushed the Prague Spring, a bold attempt to give Czechoslovakia greater freedom from communist control. In Oklahoma in 1958, nuns joined the hula hoop craze that swept across America. The simple plastic hoop became a national obsession, with 25 million sold in just 4 months. In 1964, photographer Dmitry Baltermans captured Fidel Castro sliding down an icy Moscow hill on a rug. The Cuban leader had traded his military uniform for a heavy Soviet coat, turning a diplomatic visit into an unforgettable winter scene. In 1873, an Armenian priest, a Muslim mullah, and a Greek Orthodox priest posed together in Konya, deep inside the Ottoman Empire. Their distinct robes reveal how 3 major faiths lived side by side in one city. On August 15, 1961, 19-year-old East German guard Konrad Schumann suddenly jumped the barbed wire and escaped into West Berlin. Photographer Peter Liebing captured the exact moment just 2 days after construction of the Berlin Wall began. In April 1939, Nazi propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels toured Istanbul's Blue Mosque during an unofficial private visit. The photograph captures one of Hitler's closest officials sightseeing in Turkey just 5 months before Germany invaded Poland and started the Second World War. An Italian bersagliera of the Expeditionary Corps wears the unit's famous feathered helmet during the invasion of the Soviet Union. Italy sent about 62,000 men in 1941, but the force was later expanded and devastated during the retreat from the Don. Jane Mansfield and Mickey Hargitay relax aboard their boat before heading to Catalina on July 22, 1957. The Hollywood couple married the following year and later became the parents of actress Mariska Hargitay. This photograph shows my great-uncle shortly after his liberation from a Nazi forced labor camp in Poland in 1945. His exhausted face captures the brutal reality faced by millions of people forced to work under Nazi rule. In 1900, a massive hurricane smashed Galveston, Texas, destroying thousands of homes and killing between 6,000 and 12,000 people. It remains the deadliest natural disaster in United States history. On October 24, 1901, 63-year-old Annie Edson Taylor became the first person to survive Niagara Falls inside a custom oak barrel padded with a mattress. She escaped the 167-foot drop with only minor injuries, but the fortune she expected from the stunt never came. In early November 1941, soldiers of Italy's Pasubio Division fought through the factories of Gorlovka in occupied Ukraine. Sent east to support Germany, these troops soon faced freezing weather, fierce Soviet resistance, and a war far harsher than their commanders expected. Marshal Yamagata Aritomo, photographed in Tokyo around 1921, helped build Japan's modern army and became its first chief of the general staff. He later served twice as prime minister and remained so powerful that he influenced the choice of national leaders without holding elected office. On February 12, 1957, a fire that began in a tire store swept through more than 200,000 square feet of Jaguar's Browns Lane factory. It destroyed 9 unfinished XKSS sports cars, ending their original production run, yet limited manufacturing resumed just 9 days later. Rush hour in Bucharest in 1982 forced passengers to cling to the outside of moving trams. These were Tatra T4R cars, a narrower version of the famous Tatra T3, built to fit the city's tighter streets. Helena Bonham Carter's grandfather, Eduardo Proper de Callejon, defied Spanish orders in 1940 by stamping transit papers for Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi-occupied France. Working almost non-stop for 4 days, he helped thousands escape through Spain before the regime punished him by ending his diplomatic career. Grady Stiles Jr., known as Lobster Boy, sits with 2 of his children in 1976. His rare inherited condition fused fingers and toes into claw-like shapes, and several members of his family performed in carnival shows. In 1944, the Ghost Army used inflatable tanks like this one to fool German forces about the location and strength of American units. Its soldiers also broadcast fake radio messages, played recorded battle sounds, and impersonated officers, while their secret missions remained classified for decades. In 1908, American explorer Robert Peary stood aboard the Roosevelt before his final attempt to reach the North Pole. The ship was built with a reinforced hull that could survive crushing Arctic ice, carrying Peary toward his disputed claim of reaching the pole in 1909. Lenny Kravitz with his parents, actress Roxy Roker, and television producer Cy Kravitz in 1982. Roxy famously broke barriers by starring in one of American television's first long-running interracial couples. United States cavalry soldiers posed beneath the grizzly giant in 1900, showing just how enormous this ancient sequoia already was. More than a century later, the tree still stands in Yosemite and is estimated to be over 2,000 years old. In 1938, Engineer First Class Hayakawa of the Yokosuka 1st Special Naval Landing Force posed on a Type 95 motorcycle in Kanku, Qingdao. Its armored-looking sidecar and rising sun emblem reveal how Japan turned civilian-style machines into tools of military occupation. In Addis Ababa in 1935, men unable to repay money could be tied together and publicly detained. This rare photograph shows debt turned into physical punishment just months before Italy invaded Ethiopia. King Alexander of Greece met Serbia's future king, Alexander, at Dragomancy on February 11, 1918. Both men later died violently, the Greek king from a monkey bite infection, and the Serbian king in an assassination caught on film. Before 1975, this South Korean military billboard in South Vietnam claimed that saving one innocent civilian mattered more than killing 100 Viet Cong. The slogan stands in shocking contrast to documented massacres of Vietnamese civilians by South Korean troops. Before casinos ruled Las Vegas, its desert springs fed farms and gave the city its name, meaning the Meadows. This rare photograph shows the quiet settlement before the railroad boom of 1905 transformed it into a fast-growing city. Crown Prince George of Greece stands with Prince Waldemar of Prussia between 1915 and 1920. George later became king twice, lost his throne twice, and returned from exile both times. On August 17, 1945, President José Laurel dissolved the Japanese-backed Second Philippine Republic after Japan announced its surrender. The regime had lasted less than 2 years, and its collapse cleared the way for the Commonwealth government to return. This rare photo shows the filming of La Haine in Chanteloup-le-Vigne, France, before its release in 1995. Giant portraits of poets Arthur Rimbaud and Charles Baudelaire tower over the crew as they shoot one of the film's street scenes. In 1984, Anthony Sorazzi leaned from scaffolding to kiss the Statue of Liberty during its massive restoration. As the grandson of Italian immigrants, he was honoring the monument that welcomed millions of newcomers arriving in America. In 1869, self-proclaimed Emperor Joshua Norton was photographed riding a bicycle through San Francisco. Locals treated his royal decrees as jokes, yet restaurants accepted his homemade money, and thousands attended his funeral. In 1977, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat met Israeli Foreign Minister Moshe Dayan to discuss ending decades of conflict. The historic image later drew controversy because Sadat's tie appears to feature a repeating pattern resembling swastikas. In 1920, New York women voted in a presidential election for the first time after the 19th Amendment became law. Their ballots helped decide a landslide victory for Warren Harding, just months after millions of American women gained voting rights nationwide. Aunt Edna arrives for Saturday Night Bingo in the 1970s, playing several cards at once with a bright orange marker. The cigarette burning beside her cards shows how normal indoor smoking was, even during a crowded bingo game. In 1886, Oglala Lakota leader Rocky Bear posed while touring with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. He carried a beaded war club and pistol, while his feather headdress and bone breastplate displayed his status and heritage. Jim Thorpe of the Sac and Fox Nation won both the pentathlon and decathlon at the 1912 Olympics. A viral story claims he competed in mismatched shoes found in the trash, but historians say there is no solid evidence it happened at those games. In 1942, Boeing hid its Seattle bomber factory beneath a fake neighborhood built across the roof. Hollywood designers added houses, streets, trees, and even actors, while thousands of workers built B-17 bombers underneath. After the People Power Revolution drove Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos into exile in 1986, officials found thousands of her shoes inside Malacanang Palace. The staggering collection became a global symbol of the ruling family's excess, while millions of Filipinos lived in poverty. At Woodstock in 1969, Santana received just $750, while Jimi Hendrix was paid $18,000. Santana had not even released their first album yet, but their explosive performance made them famous worldwide. In July 1939, Dorothea Lange photographed 5 men outside a country store near Gordonton, North Carolina. The crowded Coca-Cola, tobacco, and gasoline signs reveal how major brands had reached even remote southern communities during the Great Depression. On August 15, 1976, President Gerald Ford and his daughter Susan watched television in a Kansas City hotel room. The next day, the Republican convention began, where Ford faced a fierce challenge from Ronald Reagan and narrowly won the presidential nomination. Austro-Hungarian assault troops destroy enemy barbed wire, probably on the Eastern Front during the First World War. Cutting these defenses under fire was one of the deadliest tasks, but it opened a path for the soldiers attacking behind them. A Catholic priest blesses 2 kneeling nuns inside a church in August 1955. Before the reforms of the 1960s, nuns wore full habits and strict religious ceremonies like this shaped daily life. On August 17, 1976, the River Thames fell dramatically as Britain suffered its worst drought in more than 2 centuries. Months of record heat and little rain emptied reservoirs, damaged crops, and forced emergency water restrictions across the country. Madonna plays guitar in 1980, 3 years before releasing her first album. Before becoming a pop icon, she performed with New York bands and played both guitar and drums. In 1886, baseball legend Charles Old Hoss Radbourne secretly gave a New York Giants player the middle finger while posing with the Boston Beaneaters. It became the earliest known photograph of the insulting gesture. Sophia Loren poses for a costume test as Neves in the Italian drama The River Girl in 1954. The film helped turn the 20-year-old actress into an international star. In May 1949, HMS Rodney, HMS Revenge, and HMS Nelson lay at Inverkeithing awaiting demolition after surviving the Second World War. Nelson and Rodney were extraordinary battleships, carrying all 9 of their massive 16-inch guns in front of the bridge. Stan Lee joined the United States Army in 1942 and repaired telegraph equipment before moving to the Training Film Division. There, he wrote military manuals and training films, earning the rare official job title of playwright. In 1974, 14-year-old Margaret Ellen Fox took a bus to meet a man offering her a babysitting job and vanished. Hours later, a caller demanded $10,000 for her life, but Margaret was never found. American soldiers search a German prisoner during the Saint-Mihiel offensive in September 1918. It was the first major independent American attack of the First World War, and the Allies captured about 15,000 German troops in just 4 days. In November 1938, Louisiana farmer William E. Smith inspected his beehives near Morganza. He was about to receive aid from the Farm Security Administration, a New Deal agency that helped struggling rural families survive the Great Depression. In 1965, Lucille Ball was the only woman running a major Hollywood studio. At Desilu, she backed 2 risky shows that became television legends: Star Trek and Mission Impossible. On September 27, 1996, Taliban fighters entered Kabul after government forces abandoned the Afghan capital. Within hours, they seized former President Mohammad Najibullah from a United Nations compound, tortured and killed him, then displayed his body in public. This 1960s ad sold a hand tool that carved fresh grooves into dangerously worn smooth tires. It promised thousands of extra miles, but cutting into weakened rubber could hide serious damage and increase the risk of a blowout. At the Westchester County Fair in the summer of 1910, crowds gathered around Rattlesnake Joe and other traveling sideshows. Their painted signs promised giant snakes, Wild West danger, and even a living mermaid held captive. Apollo 14 Commander Alan Shepard stands beside a lunar landing training vehicle before a test flight on December 14, 1970. The unstable machine simulated lunar gravity, and Shepard had already survived a fiery crash in an earlier model by ejecting seconds before impact. The London Blitz left entire neighborhoods in ruins in 1941 after German bombers attacked the city for 57 nights in a row. More than 40,000 British civilians were killed during the wider campaign, yet London never surrendered. This is V Grand, the 5,000th B-24 Liberator built at the Consolidated Factory in San Diego. Photographed in Italy in September 1944, the bomber was covered with thousands of factory workers' signatures. On August 15, 1976, Lynyrd Skynyrd stormed the World Series of Rock at Hawthorne Racetrack near Chicago. The massive bill also featured Peter Frampton, yes, Gary Wright, and natural gas. Around 1920, psychiatrist Herman Rorschach was photographed rowing, shortly before publishing the 10 ink blots that made him famous. He died from appendicitis in 1922 at just 37, never seeing his test become one of psychology's most recognizable tools. In 1954, Bob Hawke set a world record by drinking 2.5 pints of beer in just 11 seconds. He later became Australian Prime Minister and reached a record approval rating of 75% in 1984. In 1936, Curtiss Goshawk fighters flew in a massive formation above San Diego. These carrier-based biplanes belonged to the final generation of naval fighters before faster monoplanes made them obsolete. Albert Einstein and Kurt Gödel walked together at Princeton's Institute for Advanced Study in 1954. Einstein once said his own work mattered less because he came to the Institute mainly for the privilege of walking home with Gödel. On December 12, 1930, vaudeville star Ray Samuels held what was claimed to be the last bottle of Schlitz beer brewed before Prohibition. The rare bottle was insured by Continental Life Insurance Company for $25,000. Stanley Eakin built this Wild Comet jet car in Grove City, Ohio, in 1953, using a 60-horsepower V8 engine and one front wheel on a motorcycle fork. It reached 90 miles per hour and became an atomic age attraction at car shows across the 1950s. This 1913 Autochrome captures a young woman in England in rare natural color. The image was created using millions of dyed potato starch grains, an early process that transformed black and white photography into color. Kay Petre became the Queen of Brooklands after battling Gwenda Stewart for the women's outer circuit lap record. In 1935, Petre reclaimed it the same day at over 134 miles per hour, earning a rare British Automobile Racing Club badge. In 1924, silent film star Louise Brooks posed for Alfred Cheney Johnston while dancing with the Ziegfeld Follies. The daring feather costume made the photograph striking enough to appear on the cover of the National Police Gazette. This rare photograph from 1870s, China shows two men dwarfed by enormous stone elephants. Such animals guarded sacred roads to imperial tombs, with standing and kneeling pairs symbolizing eternal protection. Chernushka shortly before her flight aboard Sputnik 9 in 1961. She returned alive after one orbit, helping prove that Yuri Gagarin could survive the same journey just weeks later. During Prohibition in 1925, seized alcohol was poured from an upper window as a crowd watched below. Authorities destroyed huge quantities of liquor, but illegal bars and bootleggers continued supplying millions of Americans. In 1923, a German man covered his suit with thousands of coins made nearly worthless by hyperinflation. The costume was valued at 43,000 marks, yet soaring prices could erase that value within hours. Telephone operators prepare for a shift change in the 1950s, surrounded by switchboards that routed every call by hand. Each connection required an operator to plug the correct cable into the correct socket, making human speed and accuracy essential. This 1926 portrait of Louise Brooks was titled Nature Nymph, capturing her just as she was becoming a Hollywood star and fashion icon. That year, she signed with Paramount Pictures and began making major waves in silent cinema. The Slovak armored train Sokol was built from captured German equipment and used for patrols after the war. Its mixed arsenal included a BP-44 gun wagon and triple MG-151 anti-aircraft guns. These 152mm guns were built for Soviet warships canceled during the Second World War. Already produced at Leningrad's Bolshevik factory, they were mounted on railway platforms and used to defend the besieged city. As Soviet tanks became a growing threat, German armored trains gained anti-tank weapons in several improvised ways. Crews placed captured T-34s, anti-tank guns, and even damaged German tanks on flat cars before special wagons with Panzer IV turrets appeared. On November 13, 1982, Dooku Kim challenged Ray Mancini for the world title, but a knockout in round 14 left him in a coma, and he died 4 days later. 3 months later, Kim's mother took her own life, and the following summer, referee Richard Green did the same. In the 19th century, arsenic complexion wafers were sold to women as a way to remove freckles and create fashionably pale skin. The secret was poison. Repeated doses could cause vomiting, organ damage, cancer, and death. In 1921, up to 15,000 armed coal miners marched through West Virginia in the largest labor uprising in United States history. At Blair Mountain, they fought company guards and police for days until federal troops arrived, ending the largest armed rebellion since the Civil War. In 1944, Japanese-American Boy Scouts imprisoned at Colorado's Grenada camp lowered the United States flag to half-staff. They honored 6 second-generation Japanese-American soldiers killed fighting for the same country that had confined their families behind barbed wire. In 1919, a Boston storage tank burst, unleashing a wave of molasses that raced through the streets at 35 miles per hour. The disaster crushed buildings, killed 21 people, and injured about 150. On June 11, 1964, 42-year-old Willy Walter Seifert entered a schoolyard in Volkhoven, Germany, carrying a homemade flamethrower and a lance. He murdered 8 children and 2 teachers before swallowing poison and dying hours later. During Stalin's purges from 1937 to 1939, more than 18,000 Mongolian Buddhist monks were executed. Over 700 monasteries were destroyed, nearly wiping out a religious tradition that had shaped Mongolia for centuries. In 1954, an Air Force test pilot tested an MA-2 high-altitude helmet while drinking Heinz grape juice through a tube. The unusual setup proved pilots could eat and drink without removing vital flight gear. Ainu girls began lip tattooing around age 7, enduring years of painful cuts rubbed with soot until the design was complete. Japan banned the ritual in 1871, nearly erasing a tradition once considered essential for marriage. In the 1940s, Coco Chanel had an affair with Nazi spy Hans Günther von Dinklage and tried to seize her Jewish partner's perfume company. She later worked as a German agent under the codename Westminster, yet escaped punishment after the war, possibly through Winston Churchill's influence. In 1947, protesters gathered outside Madison Square Garden and urged President Truman to veto the Taft-Hartley Act, which sharply restricted labor unions. Truman vetoed it, but Congress overruled him and passed the law anyway. In 1965, Mary Shotwell Little vanished after shopping in Atlanta, leaving behind a blood-stained car, untouched groceries, and her folded underwear. Weeks later, the woman who replaced her at work was found murdered inside a car trunk, raising fears that Mary had discovered a deadly secret. In 1942, a sailor aboard HMS Alcantara used a portable sewing machine to repair a signal flag during a voyage to Sierra Leone. Fashion photographer Cecil Beaton captured the scene while documenting the Second World War for Britain's Ministry of Information. In the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in 1943, a Red Army soldier captures a German soldier beside a 37mm POC 35/36 anti-tank gun. The small cannon could pierce early tanks, but by 1943 it was nearly useless against newer Soviet armor. After Joe Siffert died at Brands Hatch in 1971, more than 50,000 mourners filled the streets of Fribourg for his funeral. His Porsche 917 led the procession wearing a black mourning band, honoring the Swiss driver who won 14 World Endurance Championship races. 3 Michigan fishermen display a massive catch in the early 1900s when fishing limits were far less strict than they are today. Photos like this helped expose how quickly heavy harvesting could empty even the richest American lakes and rivers. On the third day of the ground war in February 1991, this destroyed Iraqi artillery battery lay on Objective White near As Salman. The combat photographer took it as a substitute for harsher images he never captured and others he still refuses to share. In the late 1870s, Harvard student Theodore Roosevelt posed in his rowing gear. Once a sickly child weakened by severe asthma, he built his body through intense exercise and later became the youngest president in American history. Angelina Lauro caught fire in St. Thomas on March 30, 1979, and the water used to fight the blaze sank her at the dock, though everyone escaped. Refloated and sold for scrap, her fire-damaged hull leaked during the tow to Taiwan, and she sank in the Pacific 6 months later. In 1926, a watchman at Mar del Plata's Bristol Beach confronted swimmers who stayed uncovered after leaving the water. Mundo Argentino published this photograph as proof of how strictly beach clothing rules were enforced. Both sides in the Spanish Civil War painted cartoon characters on their aircraft, and this Republican Polikarpov, Barn 15, carried Mickey Mouse. Republican pilots nicknamed this Soviet fighter Chato, meaning flat-nosed, because of its blunt engine cowling. Near Armentières, on February 22, 1915, Second Lieutenant L.J. Barley watches a rifle grenade being prepared inside a frontline trench. These early grenades were launched from rifles, giving soldiers the dangerous ability to strike enemies beyond the trench walls. Greek bandits posed with rifles and traditional weapons in the 1920s when armed gangs still controlled remote mountain roads. Many kidnapped wealthy travelers for ransom and survived through secret deals with local politicians and villagers. On April 26, 1986, Pripyat residents carried on as usual, unaware that Reactor 4 had exploded just kilometers away. The city was not evacuated until the next afternoon, after thousands had already been exposed to radioactive fallout. In 1992, a Bosniak soldier entered Mostar's shattered Karađoz Bey Mosque, carrying a rifle in one hand and prayer beads in the other. Built in the 16th century, the historic mosque was heavily damaged during the Bosnian War. Captain Edward Smith watches from the bridge of the RMS Adriatic as passengers gather on the deck below. Before commanding the Titanic, he led this famous luxury liner, which featured a swimming pool, Turkish baths, and an indoor squash court. Around 1910, Shorpy Higginbotham worked as a greaser at Alabama's Bessie Mine, carrying 2 heavy buckets despite claiming to be only 14. His job placed him directly beside moving coal cars, where one mistake could crush him. Bersani district after the Anglo-American bombing of Bucharest on April 4, 1944. The raid struck homes and railway targets, killing hundreds of civilians in one of the deadliest attacks Romania had ever suffered. The Golden Arrow set a land speed record of 231 miles per hour in 1929, driven by Henry Seagrave. Its 7-ton body was designed like an aircraft, and this London appearance brought a record-breaking machine onto ordinary streets. In 1962, John Glenn became the first American to orbit Earth, circling the planet 3 times in Friendship 7. A faulty warning suggested the heat shield was loose, so Glenn returned through the atmosphere with the rocket pack still attached to hold it in place. On February 24, 1945, soldiers of Company L waited in the ruins of Düren for orders to attack a building held by up to 40 German troops. Army photographer Ernest Brown captured the tense moment before they moved in. Steven Spielberg directs the brutal Omaha beach landing in Saving Private Ryan during filming in 1997. The sequence used about 1,000 extras, many from the Irish Army Reserve, and took 4 weeks to shoot on an Irish beach. Workers hoist a replacement statue of George Washington onto the Washington County Courthouse dome. The original statue had been struck by lightning, forcing this dangerous installation high above the city. On December 13, 1972, Harrison Schmitt and Eugene Cernan explored a giant boulder during humanity's final moonwalk to date. This grainy image came from a color television camera mounted on their lunar roving vehicle. Ukrainian prisoner Vasily Rambovsky escaped a Norwegian camp in 1944 and survived 2 brutal winters alone in the forest. Found starving in a barn in 1947, he was shocked to learn that the war had already ended. On February 24, 1968, Nature announced the first known pulsar, discovered by graduate student Jocelyn Bell Burnell using a huge field of 2,048 antennas. Her supervisor, Anthony Hewish, later shared the Nobel Prize for the discovery, while Bell Burnell was excluded. Austro-Hungarian troops launch a giant paper balloon from Montepiana during the First World War. It carried proclamations over enemy lines, turning the wind into a silent weapon for spreading propaganda among Italian soldiers. In February 1934, the Soviet ship Chelyuskin was crushed by Arctic ice and sank within 2 hours. More than 100 people escaped onto the frozen sea, where they survived for 2 months before daring pilots rescued them by air. Marilyn Monroe and Arthur Miller attend the April in Paris Ball at New York's Waldorf Astoria in 1957. Behind their smiles, Miller was facing a contempt conviction for refusing to name suspected communists, a ruling later overturned. In 1938, this family lived in a handmade houseboat on the Kanawha River in Charleston, West Virginia, during the Great Depression. Their tiny floating home provided shelter, fishing access, and mobility. But floods could destroy everything they owned without warning. On February 18, 1986, the Russian River flooded Guerneville, California after relentless rain. The river rose to nearly 50 feet, submerging homes, businesses, and roads across the town. In 1916, A herd of circus elephants marched through the streets of Greensburg, Pennsylvania. Their enormous size turned an ordinary town road into a rare spectacle, with residents standing just feet away from the animals. American soldiers transport Okinawan women and children to a refugee camp in 1945. They ride in a marine amphibious vehicle while one of the Pacific War's bloodiest battles rages nearby. In 1938, Paul Popper photographed this giant divine eye, the main symbol of Cao Dai, a Vietnamese religion founded just 12 years earlier. Cao Dai combined Buddhism, Christianity, Taoism, Confucianism, and Islam, and even declared Victor Hugo one of its saints. Elizabeth Gardner of Rockford, Illinois, sits in a bomber cockpit during the Second World War. She was one of about 1,000 women who flew military aircraft as civilian pilots, freeing male pilots for combat missions. Men and women operate rows of roaring looms at White Oak Mill in Greensboro, North Carolina, around 1909. The enormous mill opened in 1905 and became one of the world's largest denim factories, producing fabric later used for iconic American workwear. Lance Corporal Robert A. Bishop crawls through a Viet Cong tunnel complex found by the 2nd Battalion, 26th Marines. These cramped tunnels could hide fighters, weapons, supplies, and deadly traps just beneath American positions. On the 5th of March, 1937, fathers in Blenrhonda, South Wales, carried their babies outside for fresh air. Each child was wrapped against the cold in a seal fagu, a traditional Welsh woolen blanket designed for carrying babies safely. Write in the comments which photo you liked the most.